The ocean has always been a place of contradictions. It is calm, yet it hides tempests. It is vast, yet it feels intimate when you stand at its edge. By daylight, it glitters like liquid glass. By night, it becomes a velvet expanse where moonlight dances in silver threads across the rolling swells. This is where our story begins, not in the ruins of a desert city or atop some windswept mountain, but far from any shore, in the middle of an unbroken horizon. Out here, there is no skyline of towers, no familiar outline of hills, only the steady breathing of the sea and the patient rhythm of waves that have been moving uninterrupted for thousands of years. And yet, beneath this seemingly endless blue plain, something ancient sleeps. Imagine a place so remote that few ships pass, a place untroubled by fishermen's nets or cargo routes. Beneath its surface lies a silence older than any human map, a silence broken only once by a faint metallic ping on a sonar screen. It was not the kind of signal that makes headlines. At first, it was nothing more than a blip, a triangular outline traced in sound waves, the sort of reading a casual observer might dismiss as a glitch, a natural ridge, a quirk of the seabed. But to those who know the language of the deep, the shape was wrong, too precise, too deliberate, too perfect. Triangles are rare in nature, and this one was enormous. If you could sink through the layers of water here, past the dancing schools of fish, past the flickering shafts of sunlight, you would eventually enter a world without color, a twilight realm where even the boldest predators move slowly, conserving their energy in the crushing pressure, and there, resting as though it had been placed with purpose, is a structure unlike anything expected to be found in such a place. It rises from the seafloor with an almost unnatural symmetry. Angled faces meet at crisp edges, its summit is flattened, as though once crowned by something long vanished. Coral has claimed it in soft pastel blooms. Sea anemones sway from its sides like lanterns in an eternal current. But beneath those living layers, the stone is still there, ancient, cold, and unmoved. The mystery is not simply that a pyramid exists underwater. The world is littered with drowned cities and sunken temples, relics of coastal lands swallowed by time. The mystery here is one of location. This pyramid does not sit off the coast of a known civilization. It is not within reach of any historical shoreline, even when accounting for ice ages and shifting tides. It stands in the deep, where no empire should have walked, where no human should have been able to quarry or shape such stone. It is as if someone built it on land that no longer exists, or in a place that was never meant to hold it. For centuries, sailors told tales of strange shapes rising from the ocean floor. Some spoke of towers glimpsed through crystal-clear shallows before storms swallowed them again. Others whispered of lights, soft, golden, and flickering, beneath the waves, far from any known island. Most dismissed these as the fancies of long voyages, the delirium of salt, wind, and isolation. But now, for the first time, technology has given us more than hearsay. The blip on the sonar became a scan. The scan became an image, and the image was unmistakable. The mind reels at the possibilities. Was it a ceremonial monument raised by a forgotten seafaring people, a navigation marker for ships that no longer sail? Or is it, as some dare to imagine, the remnant of a myth, an echo of Atlantis, Lemuria, or another civilization that history insists never existed? And yet, while theories are many, answers are few. The ocean keeps its secrets well. Its depths are not easily trespassed. Even our most advanced submersibles must fight against the weight of miles of water pressing in from all sides. The deeper we go, the darker it becomes, not just in light, but in certainty. What is certain is that the pyramid's discovery has stirred something ancient in us. Humans are drawn to mystery the way tides are drawn to the moon. We cannot resist the pull of the unknown. In every age we have dug through ruins, brushed sand from lost scripts, and crossed deserts in search of cities that may never have existed, and now, we are being called into the sea. In the days ahead, We will follow the journey of those who first glimpsed the pyramid, those who dove toward it, and those who have tried to explain it. We will wander through currents of history, touching on myths both celebrated and forgotten, and we will explore the strange tension between what we can prove and what we can only feel, because sometimes, the most enduring truths are the ones that resist proof entirely. Out on the open ocean, far from any shore, the waves continue their endless breathing. The wind brushes across the surface, whispering secrets it has carried for millennia. Somewhere beneath, the pyramid waits, not crumbling, not eroding, but patient, as though it knows that time itself is on its side. And so, as we begin this journey together, we leave behind the safety of the coastline. We set our course toward a horizon with no landmarks, guided only by a faint triangle etched in sound. What lies ahead may challenge our history, our science, and perhaps even our sense of where humanity has walked. The ocean has a story to tell, and it begins here. It began, as so many discoveries do, not with a grand expedition or a sweeping cinematic moment, but with the quiet hum of machinery and a crew performing their routine work. The vessel was small, nothing like the deep-sea research ships, with their sprawling decks and towering cranes. This was a modest survey craft, commissioned to chart a stretch of ocean floor that most maps had left blank. The job was simple: run a series of sonar sweeps, record the data, and submit the charts for navigational updates. The sea that day was gentle, its surface rippling under a pale sky, the kind of calm that makes the horizon look infinite. Below deck, in the dimly lit sonar room, the air was cool, the hum of electronics constant, and the only movement was the slow sweep of the display tracing invisible fingers across the unseen depths. The first ping was almost too subtle to notice. Just a shape, there one moment, gone the next, caught in the arc of the sonar beam. The operator leaned closer. Sonar data is notoriously fickle. One stray reading could be a school of fish, a pod of dolphins, even a cloud of sediment drifting lazily in the current. But this was different. When the next sweep passed over the same coordinates, the shape reappeared, clearer now, sharper. It was a triangle. Triangles are rare in the natural underwater world. Coral reefs bloom in chaotic tangles, volcanic rock forms in jagged, uneven ridges, and sand dunes ripple in gentle arcs. Geometry, true, deliberate geometry, stands out like a whisper in a silent room. The sonar operator froze, tracing the outline with a finger. It was not just triangular, it was perfectly symmetrical, with angles too precise to be accidental. The base stretched wider than the height of the Eiffel Tower, and its sides rose evenly toward a flat summit. This was not a boulder, not a ridge, not anything nature would craft in such clean, unwavering lines. By protocol, anomalies like this were logged and rechecked, the coordinates were marked, the equipment recalibrated, and the crew made a slow, deliberate pass over the site again. The screen lit up with the same shape, this time even more defined. A few of the older crew members exchanged glances. They'd heard stories about strange things on the seabed before, usually in bars along remote ports, told over too many drinks. Most were tales of shipwrecks, lost cargo, or oddly shaped rocks that looked like something more. But this was the kind of reading that made even seasoned mariners pause. Word of the finding spread quietly at first. The captain sent the data to the sponsoring agency, which forwarded it to a marine geology department. The scientists there were intrigued enough to request raw readings. Soon the images were being studied in quiet offices, far from the ocean, rooms lined with maps, charts, and shelves of books detailing ancient coastlines and drowned worlds. But before anyone could rush to conclusions, a team was dispatched to the site for verification. This is where the accounts diverge. Some say the confirmation came quickly. High-resolution sonar from a second vessel confirmed the pyramid shape with startling clarity. Others claim there was resistance, skepticism from experts who suspected a trick of light or an unusual rock formation polished into symmetry by centuries of currents. Still, even skeptics had to admit the shape was uncanny. Side-scan sonar rendered it as a three-dimensional form rising from the flat seabed like a sentinel. Measurements suggested it stood over 150 feet tall with a base nearly twice that length, and it was isolated. There were no other structures, no ridges or reefs nearby, just one perfect pyramid, sitting alone in the middle of an otherwise barren stretch of seafloor. The deeper mystery lay in its location. Ancient pyramids on land, Egypt, Mesoamerica, Southeast Asia, were all built near the heartlands of thriving civilizations. This one stood hundreds of miles from any current coastline and, more importantly, from any known ancient shoreline, even after accounting for Ice Age sea levels. If it had been built by human hands, those hands would have needed to work in a place no historian believed was ever inhabited. The official reports were dry, as official reports tend to be. They noted the coordinates, the dimensions, the symmetry. They proposed a list of possibilities: volcanic basalt shaped by currents, coral growth over a collapsed lava dome, a remnant of an ancient seamount. And yet, between the lines, there was a quiet acknowledgement: this was something worth returning to. Unofficially, whispers began. Someone had leaked an early sonar image to a journalist, who ran it without much fanfare in a maritime newsletter. From there it spread, not through mainstream headlines, but through the quieter channels, maritime forums, fringe archaeology groups, and the strange persistent corners of the internet where modern explorers gather to share their findings. People began to overlay the sonar image with photographs of the Great Pyramid of Giza, noting eerie similarities in slope and proportion. Some claimed to find alignments with star constellations when mapping its orientation, though these claims were more speculation than science. Back aboard the survey vessel, the crew had already moved on to other assignments, but a few of them, in private, admitted that they couldn't shake the image. One described it as looking at a shadow of the past. Another said it felt like finding a cathedral in the desert. Whatever it was, it didn't belong where it was found. That truth alone was enough to stir curiosity, far beyond the quiet sonar room where it first appeared. And so, like a faint light glimpsed from the shore, the pyramid began to draw people toward it. Scientists eager to study it, divers hoping to touch it, storytellers weaving it into the fabric of human myth. In the months that followed, expeditions would be planned. Some would return with more images, some with conflicting explanations, and some with nothing at all. But all of them would add layers to the story until the pyramid became less of a solitary object and more of a living mystery, shaped not only by the currents of the sea, but by the currents of human imagination. Above the site, the waves continued their slow, endless breathing. The pyramid lay below, unchanged, unseen, except by the rare visitor who descended into its silent realm. Yet from that first sonar ping onward, it would never again be entirely hidden, not from the eyes of those determined to uncover what it really was. The next step would be to go closer, to move beyond sound waves and shadows and see the structure with human eyes, a task far more dangerous than most people realize, for the ocean is not quick to surrender its secrets. Once the first images had been studied, and the murmurs had begun, the next step seemed inevitable. The shape had to be mapped in full. But in the deep ocean, inevitability is never simple. It is easy to imagine, perhaps from documentaries or adventure films, that mapping the seafloor is a matter of dropping a camera overboard and letting it drift down. In truth, the ocean resists observation at every step. Sunlight fades within the first few dozen meters. Currents twist and pull at any equipment. The sheer weight of the water above crushes fragile instruments in minutes if they are not engineered to withstand pressures hundreds of times greater than the air we breathe. The site of the pyramid lay far from any major port, meaning every piece of gear had to survive not only the descent into the deep, but also the long journey across open water just to reach it. For this task, The team brought an arsenal of modern tools, multi-beam sonar arrays capable of scanning broad swaths of seabed with razor precision, ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, small enough to maneuver close to the structure's walls, yet armored like miniature submarines, autonomous underwater drones, pre-programmed to trace slow, deliberate paths over the site, building digital models piece by piece. The plan was to approach in stages, first high-altitude mapping, sonar scans taken from hundreds of meters above the seabed to capture the structure's place in its surrounding landscape. Then, mid-range sweeps to refine the measurements. Finally, close passes with cameras and laser scanners to capture surface details. From the very first broad sweeps, the data was startling. The pyramid stood on a patch of flat seabed, as though the ocean floor had been cleared around it. The base was sharply defined, its corners aligned to within a degree of perfect right angles. Even in the murky, ghostly images produced by sonar, the symmetry was undeniable. At night, when the day's scanning runs were over, the crew would gather in the ship's control room to watch the 3D model slowly take shape on the main display. It began as a vague outline, then sharpened, faces sloping at uniform angles, a summit neatly truncated. The more the image resolved, the less it resembled any natural formation. There was an odd stillness in those moments. No one spoke much. The hum of the ship's generators and the gentle sway of the deck filled the silence, as if even the crew sensed that what they were seeing might one day shift the boundaries of what we know. But mapping a pyramid in the middle of the ocean is not like walking around a building with a measuring tape. The sea plays tricks. Currents stirred by distant storms can buffet drones, forcing them off course by meters. Magnetic anomalies, common near certain rock types, can throw navigational systems into confusion. More than once, the mapping runs had to be repeated when the data returned garbled, like a photograph taken through rippling heat, and always there was the risk of losing equipment entirely. One miscalculation in depth, and the crushing pressure could implode a camera housing like a tin can. An unexpected snag on a jagged outcrop could tangle a cable beyond recovery. In these waters, mistakes are expensive, yet the challenges only added to the pyramid's allure. Each successful scan revealed new details. The edges of its base were not eroded, but crisp, as though shielded from the scouring effects of current. The slopes on each side matched in pitch, rising at nearly identical angles. The summit appeared to have once supported an additional structure, now long gone, leaving a flat plateau of stone. Perhaps most intriguing were faint shadows near the base that hinted at regularly spaced indentations, possibly entrances or chambers. The resolution was not yet high enough to say for certain, but the possibility alone was enough to fuel long discussions late into the night. The mapping also revealed what was not there. There were no similar formations in the surrounding seafloor, no ridges that might suggest the pyramid was once part of a larger structure or chain. It stood alone, isolated and self-contained, like a sentinel or a monument. To the geologists on the team, this isolation raised questions. If the formation were volcanic, there should have been evidence of other eruptions nearby. If it were a coral buildup over centuries, the surrounding waters should have hosted other reefs. Instead, there was only open seafloor stretching in all directions. As the days passed, the digital model became more complete. It was an eerie experience to see the pyramid rendered in full on the ship's monitors, while knowing that just below the hull, the real thing rested in total darkness. It felt as if the structure belonged to another world entirely, one we could only touch through echoes and images. The lead sonar technician, a man with 20 years' experience charting seabeds, summed it up quietly one evening. "I've seen mountains down there. I've seen cliffs, trenches, and volcanoes, but I've never seen geometry like this, where there's no reason for it to be." And so the mystery deepened. The mapping had confirmed the pyramid's existence, measured its height and breadth, and revealed its precise symmetry. But it had not answered the central question: who or what built it, and why here? For that, there was only one path forward: they would have to send human eyes to see it. No scan, no matter how advanced, could replace the moment when a diver's light first cut through the blackness and fell across the face of a stone shaped by ancient hands. That decision would not come lightly. Diving to such depths is dangerous, even with modern technology. The cold, the crushing pressure, and the unpredictable sea could all turn a mission deadly. But if the mapping had taught the crew anything, it was that the pyramid was not going to give up its story willingly. On the final day of mapping, the autonomous drones made their last passes. The ship's computers compiled the completed model, every slope, every shadow, every anomaly locked into a precise three-dimensional rendering. It was beautiful in its way, a perfect shape, born in a place where no one should have been able to build it. The crew gathered one last time to watch the finished map rotate slowly on the screen. It felt, in that quiet moment, like standing at the threshold of something vast, not just a structure but a history yet untold. The next chapter of the story would begin, not with machines, but with the beating hearts of those willing to descend into the pyramid's silent realm. The completed map of the pyramid was more than a collection of measurements. It was a mirror held up to the past, reflecting a shape so deliberate, so purposeful, that it refused to be explained away as coincidence. For the scientists aboard, it was data. For the dreamers, it was a whisper of something, or someone, that had once been here in a place no map had ever shown as land. And when human beings are faced with such a whisper, we do what we have always done: we listen for echoes. The first echoes come from myth. Nearly every culture that has lived beside the sea carries in its memory the story of a lost place, a city, an island, a world swallowed whole by the water. In the West, the most famous is Atlantis, described by Plato as a great island nation that vanished beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune. Though historians argue endlessly over whether Plato's tale was allegory or truth, its grip on our imagination remains strong. Atlantis was said to be advanced, wealthy, and deeply connected to the sea, qualities that, if real, might have birthed monuments like the one found here. But Atlantis is not alone in its legend. Across the Pacific, the Polynesian islands speak of Hawaii, a homeland now lost beneath the waves, from which their ancestors set out on their oceanic voyages. In Southeast Asia, old fishermen tell of Mu, a vanished continent once bridging the Pacific, whose people were masters of stone. Off the coast of India, there are stories of Kumari Kandam, a drowned Tamil kingdom said to have been rich in temples and palaces before the sea claimed it. It is tempting, when confronted with a pyramid on the ocean floor, to press these myths into service as explanations. And yet, myths are slippery. They blend truth with metaphor, history with hope. What we call a legend might be the memory of a real event, blurred and reshaped across centuries of telling. When rising seas swallowed coastal lands after the last ice age, some 12,000 years ago, entire shorelines, villages and sacred sites disappeared. To the survivors, it must have seemed as though the ocean itself had reached out to take their world. Is it possible, then, that the pyramid is a remnant of such a world, a survivor of a time when this part of the ocean was dry land, populated by people upshaping stone with precision? The archaeological record, though sparse beneath the sea, offers tantalizing parallels. In Japan's Yonaguni Monument, a massive stepped stone formation submerged off the Ryukyu Islands, divers see angles and terraces that resemble human craftsmanship. In the Mediterranean, off the coast of Malta, lies Gujar Dalam, a network of drowned megalithic structures. In India's Gulf of Kambat, sonar has revealed symmetrical foundations miles offshore, older than any known city in the region. Each of these sites is a puzzle, part geology, part history, part mystery, and each raises the same uncomfortable possibility that our understanding of where human civilization began may be incomplete. The pyramid, mapped in the middle of the ocean, shares this defiance of the known timeline. If it were truly the work of human hands, it would mean that someone, some culture, existed here long before history books say they could have. Who might they have been? We can only sketch outlines based on what we know of early seafaring peoples. The Astronians, for example, were skilled navigators who spread across vast ocean distances thousands of years ago, using only the stars, waves and birds to guide them. The Lapita people of the Pacific left behind intricate pottery and signs of complex society, yet no written records. Along other coasts, from the Mediterranean to the Americas, ancient builders raised pyramids, temples, and stone alignments as both practical and ceremonial centers. Could there have been a culture here, isolated, resourceful, and ambitious enough to raise a pyramid in the middle of their world? A place where stone was not just material, but message. There is another possibility, whispered among the more speculative thinkers. Perhaps the pyramid was never meant for the land at all. If the builders were masters of the sea, living their lives on ships, building floating cities, they may have used the pyramid as a marker, a ceremonial site, or even a kind of anchor for their identity. In this view, the ocean was not an obstacle, but their home, and the pyramid, a beacon to themselves and to the gods they believed ruled the waters. The crew who mapped the site debated these possibilities in quiet conversations over late-night coffee. One geologist would lean toward volcanic formation, another toward human construction. A historian on board spoke of alignments with ancient trade routes, speculative, but oddly compelling. Even the most skeptical among them admitted that the sheer precision of the shape left room for doubt. One evening, as the ship drifted in calm seas above the pyramid, a marine archaeologist stared at the dark water and said quietly, "We always assume we're the first to come here, but what if we're the last to arrive in a place others once called home?" Theories multiply. In the absence of certainty, some imagine the pyramid as a ceremonial center, its flat summit once hosting rituals under the open sky. Others see it as part of a larger city, now swallowed entirely. A few point to its alignment, if the mapping data is correct, suggesting that its corners might once have pointed to cardinal directions, just as the Great Pyramid of Giza does. Whatever the truth, one fact is clear: the pyramid's builders, if human, were gone long before we arrived. Whether their end came from rising seas, shifting climate, or catastrophe, the ocean has done its work well. It has covered their world in silence and darkness, leaving behind only this monument to stir our questions, and perhaps that is the point. The pyramid may not be an answer at all, but a question, a deliberate challenge cast forward through time, daring those who find it to wonder. What remains is for us to draw closer, to touch its stones, to study their composition, to look for the marks of tools or the signatures of style. Only then might we move from the realm of speculation into the realm of evidence. But evidence in the deep ocean is fragile. Currents shift, sediment buries, life grows over what was once bare, and so, every moment spent near such a site feels fleeting, a brief glimpse through a window that may soon close forever. Above, the ship's lights drift on the waves like floating stars. Below, the pyramid waits as it has waited for centuries, perhaps millennia. Between the two, there is only darkness, a darkness filled with history, or the ghost of it. The next step is to descend into that darkness, to see the pyramid not as a blip on sonar or a wireframe model, but as stone beneath the fingertips. It is here that the story shifts from echo to encounter. The day chosen for the dive dawned quietly. A pale sun rose behind a curtain of thin clouds, casting the ocean in shades of muted silver. The wind was light, the waves small, as if the sea itself had decided, for once, to be still. Conditions like these were rare this far from shore, and the dive team knew they had to move quickly before the ocean changed its mind. On the deck, the divers prepared their gear with deliberate care. Thick wetsuits for the cold, twin oxygen tanks for the depth, lights designed to cut through the pitch, cameras mounted to helmets, recording every movement. At this depth, redundancy was not luxury. It was survival. The ship drifted above the coordinates. Somewhere below, in a darkness untouched by sunlight, the pyramid waited. The descent began slowly. At first, the water was a shifting blue, sunlight filtering down in soft beams that danced with drifting plankton. But the deeper they went, the more the light faded, until it became a pale suggestion rather than an illumination. Soon there was only the glow of their lamps, casting cones of gold into the black. The water here was colder, heavier. Every breath came with the sound of bubbles racing toward the surface. The divers kept their movements controlled, careful not to stir up silt that could blind them in an instant. Each meter felt like another step away from the known world, and then, through the haze of distance, a shadow appeared. At first it was only a darker shape against the darkness, but as they closed in, the beams of their lights caught the edges, sharp lines where no natural rock should have such precision. The pyramid rose from the seafloor like a ghost of geometry, its sides disappearing into the gloom above the divers' heads. One of them later described the moment as like swimming toward a memory you didn't know you had. It felt familiar, almost comforting in its symmetry, and yet alien in its isolation. They circled slowly, taking in the base. The structure was enormous, the stones forming its sides fitted together with uncanny neatness. Some blocks were as large as small cars, their surfaces worn but not broken. Each face sloped upward at a steady angle, converging toward the flat summit far above. The first touch was electric. A gloved hand reached out and pressed against the stone. It was smooth, smoother than the divers expected for something lying beneath the sea for so long. Not polished exactly, but lacking the jagged irregularities of natural rock. In places it was covered with coral, soft fronds swaying gently in the current. In others the stone lay bare, as if the sea itself had been reluctant to cloak it entirely. Their lights revealed subtle variations in color, pale gray in some areas, darker and almost metallic in others. This was no single mass of rock, it was built from individual blocks, each cut and placed with intention. Back aboard the surface vessel, the geologists would pore over the footage and freeze frames. They would identify the stone as a type rarely found in this part of the world, basalt in some places, sandstone in others. Such a combination should have been geologically improbable here, and yet here it was, forming the sides of a monument hundreds of feet tall. How had these stones come to rest here, so far from any natural source? The basalt suggested volcanic origins, but the nearest volcanic islands were hundreds of miles away. The sandstone spoke of ancient seabeds, lifted and carved, but not in this location. The diversity of materials hinted at quarrying, transport and deliberate construction, all in a place where history said no civilization had ever lived. Moving along the base, the divers found signs that deepened the mystery further. In several spots, the gaps between stones were narrow enough to slip a knife blade through, but no wider, a precision fit that even modern engineering would find difficult to achieve underwater. Elsewhere, faint grooves ran parallel across the surface of certain blocks, as if cut by tools now lost to time. Were these marks the work of human hands, or the strange product of erosion, in a way we do not yet understand? The divers could not say. They could only record, measure, and keep moving. Near one corner of the pyramid, they discovered something unexpected, a protruding block with a shallow depression in its surface, perfectly round and no larger than a human palm. It could have been a natural pit, but its symmetry suggested otherwise. One diver speculated it might have been a socket for a pole or ornament. Another thought it might have held a symbolic object, long since lost to the sea. Whatever its purpose, it felt like a clue, a small human-sized detail on a monument of overwhelming scale. The ascent was slow, as safety demanded. The divers rose in stages, pausing at intervals to allow their bodies to adjust. When they broke the surface and climbed aboard, the deck crew moved quickly, helping them shed the heavy equipment. Their faces were hidden behind masks and regulators, but their eyes told the story, wide, alert, as if they were still processing what they had seen. In the hours that followed, the footage was played back again and again in the ship's control room. Each pass revealed something new, a faint alignment of grooves, an unusual discoloration in the stone, the suggestion of a step or terrace buried in sand at the base. One thing was certain, the pyramid stones did not belong here, not in composition, not in arrangement, not in the logic of geology. If nature had shaped this, it had done so with the uncanny hand of an architect. If humans had shaped it, they had done so in defiance of the limitations we believed ancient peoples faced. Either answer was extraordinary. The divers' work was far from finished. To understand the structure, they would need to return to explore higher along its slopes, to investigate the summit, and perhaps even to enter, if there was an entrance to be found. But those questions would have to wait. For now, the ocean had allowed only a brief touch, and that touch was enough to ensure they would return. Far below, the pyramid remained unmoved. It did not care who measured it, who mapped it, or who pressed gloved hands to its stones. It had waited this long, it could wait longer. But now it was no longer entirely alone. Somewhere in the human world above, its image was taking shape, in the minds of scientists, in the whispers of storytellers, and in the restless curiosity of those who had heard the first fragments of its story. Long before sonar screens, lit up with strange shapes, before divers lowered themselves into the cold, crushing depths, people were already telling stories about what the sea had swallowed, because the ocean is not just water, it is memory. Every coastline in the world carries its own version of the same tale. A city once stood here. Its towers reached toward the sun. Its people traded, sang, and prayed. And then one day the sea came. Sometimes the stories speak of punishment, a people made arrogant, struck down by divine wrath. Sometimes it is a simple tragedy, an earthquake, a flood, the water rising too fast for anyone to flee. And sometimes the tales are gentle, speaking of a people who simply left. They sailed away, and no one ever saw them again. These are not isolated stories. They are a chorus. In the Mediterranean, fishermen still speak of Heracleion, an Egyptian port city lost for over 1,000 years, until modern divers found its statues resting on the seabed. In Japan, the legend of Runk-Run, the Dragon King's palace beneath the waves, may echo the very real Yonaguni monument, with its steps and terraces carved in stone. In the Indian Ocean, the Tamil epics tell of Kumari Kandam, a vast land said to have been home to early kingdoms before it sank beneath the waves. And in the vastness of the Pacific, countless islands have their own vanished homeland, Hawaii to the Polynesians, Kanaloa to Hawaiian tradition, Te Pitol Te Hinua to the Rapa Nui. Names spoken softly, like the sound of the tide itself. What makes these stories endure? Part of it is their poetry. They speak to the human heart's longing for a paradise lost. But there may be something else woven into them, fragments of truth. 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age ended, the world's oceans rose more than 400 feet, shorelines shifted, low-lying lands vanished. Any coastal settlement, and many early peoples lived by the sea, would have been drowned. For the survivors, the memory of that loss could only be preserved in the way humans preserve anything before writing in story, song, and ritual. In this way, myths are like coral reefs. They begin as small facts, a single memory, and over generations, countless voices add layers, shapes change, colors deepen, until the living reef is far more complex than the original seed. Yet the seed remains hidden at its heart. The pyramid found in the middle of the ocean fits neatly into this human habit of remembering through myth. In one part of the world, it could be Atlantis, a jewel of an island taken by the sea. In another, it could be the last visible fragment of Lemuria, a lost continent, stretching across the Indian and Pacific Oceans. In yet another, it might be the ceremonial center of a maritime culture that existed only in oral tradition. Even the divers who touched its stones could feel that pull, the sense that they were encountering something already written in the collective memory. It was as if they had stepped into the setting of a story older than language itself, And yet myths are not just about the past, they shape the way we see the present. For the crew aboard the research vessel, the pyramid's discovery carried the weight of centuries of storytelling. When they looked at it, they did not just see basalt and sandstone, they saw the reflection of every tale told by sailors on calm nights, every map drawn with a phantom island in its margins, every lullaby that spoke of lands beneath the tide. In the mess hall at night, as the ship rocked gently in the swells, conversations often drifted to these stories. Someone would recall a childhood tale about a city with streets paved in pearl, sunk by a jealous god. Another would speak of an island that appears only once every 100 years, then vanishes again into the mist. The pyramid seemed to bring those stories closer, as though finding one might lead to finding them all. But the ocean has always been a master at blurring lines. It erases and preserves in the same breath. Wood rots, but stone can last millennia. A coastline can vanish in a single storm, but a song about that coast can live in human mouths for hundreds of years. The pyramid is caught in this same paradox. It is solid, measurable, real, yet its meaning is elusive, slipping between fact and legend. For the scientist, it is a puzzle to solve. For the storyteller, it is proof that myths breathe, and perhaps this is why the discovery feels so different from finding ruins on land. On land, a monument is part of a landscape we can still walk, its horizon is the same horizon as ours. But a monument under the sea is part of a horizon we cannot claim. It lives in another element, in a world where light is rare and time feels different. To visit it, we must leave our own world behind, even if only for a short while. This distance gives it power. It allows us to imagine not just what it was but when it was, and in doing so we are drawn deeper into the weave of stories the ocean has been telling since the first tide. Above the site, the research vessel drifts quietly. Below, the pyramid stands alone in the dark, its stones wrapped in the slow pulse of the sea. Around it, in the minds of those who know of it, legends gather like waves, each one carrying its own truth, its own embellishment, its own fragment of the great memory humans share. And yet myths alone cannot tell us everything. At some point, we must return to the evidence, to the physical, tangible clues that might reveal not only who built it, but how. That turn, from legend back to investigation, would lead the crew into another stage of the mystery, a stage where the pyramid's place in the larger pattern of the world's underwater anomalies would begin to emerge. The pyramid, isolated in its watery realm, feels singular, a lone monument in a vast desert of blue. And yet it is not without kin. The sea, though it hides more than it reveals, has shown us enough to know this. The pyramid is part of a pattern scattered across the globe, connecting points on a map that spans cultures, centuries, and continents. Far to the west, off the coast of Japan, lies the Yonaguni Monument, a massive formation of terraces, steps, and flat plains that plunge into the depths. Some geologists insist it is a natural structure shaped by tectonic forces. Others see the hand of ancient builders, carving the rock to mirror the ziggurats of distant lands. Thousands of miles away, in the waters of the Bahamas, divers have traced the Bimini Road, a strange line of rectangular stones, laid out like a causeway on the seafloor. Mainstream science suggests they may be natural beach rock, fractured into neat shapes. Still, the neatness is unsettling, almost deliberate. In the Mediterranean, the ruins of Heracleion rest in a sandy grave, their statues and columns perfectly preserved by the silt that covered them for over 1,000 years. And in India's Gulf of Kambat, sonar has revealed foundations and walls miles offshore, structures that date back thousands of years before the known rise of urban civilization in the region. Individually, these sites may be explained, natural formations here, drowned coastal cities there. But taken together, they form a constellation of anomalies, each one a dot on a global map of the seen and unseen. The pyramid in the middle of the ocean is simply the newest point in this constellation, and perhaps the most baffling, for it lies far from any continental shelf or known ancient shoreline. The bridge between these places is not just geography, but mystery itself. In each case, the evidence forces us to choose between competing narratives. One narrative says the structures are the product of nature, their apparent design, the result of coincidence. The other says they are remnants of civilizations we have yet to recognize, their stories erased not by time alone, but by the sea. The truth may lie somewhere between a mingling of natural forms, adapted, shaped or enhanced by human hands. For the research team aboard the vessel, this was the value of looking outward, connecting their find to the global pattern. The pyramid was no longer an isolated curiosity, it was part of a larger mystery that had been unfolding for decades. The similarities to other sites gave them reference points. The differences, its isolation, its improbable location, gave them reasons to dig deeper. Late one night, with the map table lit by a single lamp, they pinned a fresh chart to the wall. Dots marked Yonaguni Bimini Way Serikalayan, Kambat, and now this new pyramid. Red strings began to connect them, not in the sense of conspiracy, but in the spirit of curiosity. Were these dots connected by culture, by migration, by some forgotten network of trade, or were they simply scattered accidents, united only by our desire to find meaning in them? Whatever the answer, the connections had one powerful effect: they made the team restless to return to the pyramid itself. Every theory, every parallel, every link to other sites was still just that, theory. The real answers, if they existed at all, lay in the details that only close, prolonged exploration could uncover. There was talk of a deeper dive, one that would go beyond the base of the structure. The summit was a tempting goal, as was investigating the strange indentations seen on earlier scans, and there was the lingering question of whether the pyramid had any internal chambers. But with greater exploration came greater risk. The deeper the dives, the narrower the margins for safety, and the ocean, as the crew knew well, had a habit of turning from calm to dangerous in minutes. Still, the bridge had been crossed. They had moved from myth to pattern, from singular mystery to a global conversation, and now the only way forward was down, back into the black water toward the structure itself. From here the story would narrow again, focusing on what lived around the pyramid, because in the ocean, nothing is truly alone, and sometimes, what grows on and around a site can tell us as much about its history as the stone itself. The ocean has a way of claiming what falls into its care. A shipwreck becomes a reef. A stone wall becomes a city of coral. Time slows, and what was once built by hands is wrapped in the patient touch of living things. The pyramid is no exception. From the surface, the site is invisible, nothing but shifting blue water, but as the divers descend and their lights cut into the darkness, the first sign of the pyramid is not stone at all. It is color. Brilliant oranges and soft violets bloom across its faces, colonies of coral weaving themselves over the ancient blocks. Pale fronds of sea fans sway gently, filtering the water for plankton. Delicate sponges cling to crevices, their bodies breathing in the rhythm of the currents. The stone itself is cold and still, but around it, life moves constantly. Schools of small fish dart in and out of the coral like sparks, their scales catching the glow of the divers' lamps. A green sea turtle, curious but unafraid, drifts past the base, pausing to graze on algae that has taken root in sheltered cracks. Near the summit, where light from above just barely reaches, anemones wave their soft arms, catching whatever the ocean brings. Tiny shrimp hop between them, safe in the protection of their stinging tentacles, and along the pyramid's slopes, a patient hunter glides, a reef shark, sleek and unhurried, circling as though it has always known this place. To a marine biologist, this living skin is more than decoration. It is a record. Coral colonies grow slowly, sometimes only a centimeter a year, building their skeletons layer upon layer. By studying them, Scientists can estimate how long the structure has been exposed to the water, and in this case, the data suggests centuries, perhaps millennia. The same is true for the thick mats of red and brown algae, whose growth patterns whisper of seasonal changes in the current. Even the patterns of barnacle shells tell a story: which side of the pyramid faces the prevailing flow, which corners are sheltered from storms. The living things here are not just residents, they are archivists, but this archive is fragile. Every living layer is in a delicate balance with its neighbors. The smallest change, a shift in temperature, a disruption of currents, a careless fin stroke from a diver, can alter it. This is why the dive teams move with such deliberate care, keeping their lights steady and their bubbles slow. The pyramid's life is not only in the obvious blooms of coral and fish, it is in the shadows too. In the dark spaces, where crevices form natural caves, translucent lobsters hide, their antennae trembling in the current. Octopuses curl into the shelter of a hollowed stone, watching with eyes as curious as any human's. Sea cucumbers inch along the base, cleaning the sediment grain by grain. One diver later described the sensation of exploring the pyramid's slopes as walking through a cathedral in slow motion. The stone walls rose like sacred architecture, the marine life like stained glass in constant motion. The effect was one of reverence, not for the builders, known or unknown, but for the ocean itself, which had transformed a monument into a sanctuary. And perhaps that is why the team began referring to the creatures here as guardians, not in the literal sense of sentries warding off intruders, but as keepers of the pyramid's present. Without them the site would be bare and eroded. With them, it is alive, both preserved and disguised. The disguising is important. Coral and algae can obscure the edges of the stone, softening its geometry until it seems less deliberate. This may be one reason why sonar and scans were necessary to detect the pyramid's true form. To a casual glance, even from a submersible, the structure might look like a natural reef. Only careful mapping and the human instinct to notice order in chaos revealed its underlying shape. This camouflage works both for and against history. It protects the pyramid from easy discovery, but it also hides details that could answer the question of its origin. Removing the living layer to study the stone would damage an ecosystem that has existed here for centuries, and so the team must work around it, learning to read the pyramid through the life that has grown over it. In the evenings, back aboard the vessel, the divers would download their footage. The videos were almost hypnotic. Streams of tiny fish moving like silk threads in the water, sunburst corals blooming under the lamplight, shadows of larger shapes slipping into the frame and vanishing again. Watching them, one could almost forget that beneath all this life lay cold, unmoving stone. But the life is not separate from the mystery, it is part of it. The creatures that shelter here may be descendants of species that once swam among the pyramid's stones when it stood in another world entirely, before the ocean claimed it. The currents that feed them may follow paths set long ago, when coastlines were different, when the builders, if there were builders, looked out over water from a height, not from beneath it. And so the pyramid stands as a meeting place, stone from the past, life from the present, and the deep, slow future of the sea all in one. It is not empty, it is inhabited, and those inhabitants, though silent, may have preserved it better than any human guardian ever could. The team knows they will have to return here again and again, to study without disturbing, to observe without claiming. The pyramid's guardians will not yield their home easily, but in their quiet persistence, they may give us what we need most: time. When word of the pyramid first began to leak beyond the small circle of researchers and crew who had seen it, the reaction was immediate and divided. For every voice that marveled at the sonar images and the divers' footage, another was ready to dismiss it outright. And in the realm of science, dismissal is not always born from arrogance. Often, it is a form of protection for the truth and for the integrity of the process that seeks it. The first wave of skepticism came from geologists. To them, the ocean floor is a restless canvas shaped by volcanic forces, shifting plates, and the slow, grinding work of currents. They looked at the pyramid's symmetry and saw not the fingerprints of ancient builders, but the sharp edges of columnar basalt rock formed when lava cools and contracts, fracturing into geometric shapes that can mimic human architecture. In their eyes, nature was the more likely architect, and they were quick to point out that without direct sampling of the stone and surrounding geology, any claims of human construction were premature. Marine biologists offered a different caution. The pyramid's living skin of coral and algae, they said, could easily obscure natural irregularities, making the underlying rock seem smoother and more deliberate than it really was. The play of light from diver lamps could further exaggerate these effects, tricking the eye into seeing precision where there was only coincidence. And archaeologists, those whose work most often excites public imagination, were perhaps the most cautious of all. Without artifacts, tools, or inscriptions, they warned there was no context to prove the pyramid's place in human history. One called it an intriguing rock, refusing to label it anything more until hard evidence surfaced. These criticisms did not surprise the team. In fact, they had expected them. Every underwater anomaly, from Yonaguni in Japan to the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, had faced the same storm of debate. Some sites had been eventually accepted as human-made, others as purely geological. A few still lingered in a grey area, claimed by both camps, but expectation did not make the experience easier. The researchers found themselves answering the same questions again and again. Why here? Why this shape? Why no supporting structures nearby? Each answer led to another question, and each question seemed to widen the gap between those who saw human intention in the pyramid's shape and those who saw only the artistry of nature. In online forums and late-night talk shows, the conversation took on a life of its own. Some speculated wildly, calling the pyramid proof of lost continents, alien contact, or advanced civilizations erased from history. Others mocked these ideas, citing the long list of mysteries that had been explained away as soon as rigorous study was applied. The footage from the dives, now circulating in compressed, low-resolution clips, became a battleground. Supporters zoomed in on sharp corners and precise angles. Skeptics zoomed out to show how lighting, coral, and perspective could create illusions. The truth was still at the bottom of the sea, but the debate was being fought in the shallow waters of public opinion. For the crew who had been there, who had felt the stone beneath their hands, this could be frustrating. They knew the pyramid was real in shape, in size, in its undeniable presence, but they also knew that the ocean does not easily surrender certainty. In its depths, even a simple rock can seem extraordinary under the right conditions. One evening, as the ship drifted in calm waters after a day of review dives, the expedition leader addressed the team quietly over dinner. "Our job isn't to convince anyone," he said. "Our job is to gather the truth, whatever it turns out to be, and bring it back intact. The rest will sort itself out." It was a reminder that in the realm of the unknown, patience is as valuable as proof. Skepticism, after all, has its own quiet strength. It protects us from chasing shadows without checking if the light is real. It keeps our feet, or fins, on the ground when the pull of mystery tempts us to drift too far. But it can also harden into resistance. Some critics seemed determined to dismiss the pyramid before the investigation had even begun in earnest. They pointed to past discoveries that had collapsed under scrutiny. Rock formations mistaken for temples, shadows mistaken for roads, sonar glitches mistaken for ruins. The danger was that the pyramid could be swept into that same pile of curiosities too quickly. Its story closed before it had been told, and yet, doubt is not the enemy of mystery. In the best cases, it is the spark that drives investigation forward. For every geologist who argued for a natural origin, there was another who admitted the shape was unusually regular. For every archaeologist who withheld judgment, there was another who wanted to dive and see for themselves. In this way, skepticism became a tide of its own, pulling against belief, but also pushing the team to collect better evidence, clearer scans, more precise measurements. The sharper the doubt, the stronger the case would need to be. Still, the storm had left its mark. Funding for future dives would now depend not only on scientific interest but on public perception. The team needed something more, something undeniable, to keep the project alive. And so plans began to form for the boldest expedition yet, a manned descent to explore not just the base, but the summit, the sides, and if they could find it, the inside of the pyramid. The risks would be higher, the currents less forgiving, but it was the only way to move the conversation from speculation to substance. Above the ocean, the debate churned like wind-driven waves. Below it, the pyramid waited, indifferent to our arguments, unchanging in the dark. In the next stage, the divers would return not for beauty or myth, but for detail, to look for patterns, markings or alignments that could settle at least some part of the mystery. And that journey would begin with a descent unlike any before. The morning of the dive began with silence. Not the silence of absence, but the kind that carries weight, the kind before a decision or a storm. The sky was heavy with pale cloud, and the sea beneath it moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if aware of what was about to happen. On the deck, the dive team moved through their preparations without small talk. This would not be like the earlier expeditions to the pyramid's base. Today they would attempt to climb its slopes, to reach the summit, and to follow the strange indentations and markings glimpsed in earlier scans. It would be the most dangerous dive yet. Descent begins. One by one, they slipped into the water, disappearing beneath the surface, in a scatter of silver bubbles. At first the light held, shafts of sunlight rippled through the blue, illuminating tiny particles suspended in the water, but with each meter downward, the light thinned, turning from gold to pale blue, and then to nothing at all. The pyramid was still out of sight, a memory of sonar images and flickering video screens. Down here the water pressed in from all directions, heavy and cold, erasing all sense of scale. The divers could see only the narrow cone of their lamps, a moving island of light in a world without landmarks. The first glimpse came as a shadow on the edge of vision, something vast and unmoving. Then the lights found it, stone rising from the seafloor in a great, dark wall. Its slope stretched upward into the black, too large to see in a single glance. The divers adjusted their buoyancy, drifting closer, their lights sliding over blocks as big as small houses. Coral and anemones glowed in their beams like ghostly gardens. The pyramid's surface was not smooth, it was a patchwork of textures, some sections encrusted with life, others bare, showing the raw geometry of the blocks beneath. In the bare spots, the precision of the joinery was startling, edges so straight, they seemed to defy the chaos of the sea. Climbing the slope, the team began their slow ascent along one face of the pyramid, staying close enough to examine the stone without touching it unnecessarily. Fins moved in controlled strokes, careful not to stir sediment or brush fragile coral. Every few meters they stopped to film and take measurements. The slope was steep but steady. Here and there, small ledges jutted out, some no wider than a handspan, others broad enough to shelter a cluster of sea life. In one such ledge, a moray eel peered out, its body coiled deep inside the stone's shadow. Halfway up, they reached the first of the indentations, a shallow rectangular recess cut into a block the size of a truck. The edges were sharp, the corners precise, as though made by tools. Inside it was smooth and empty. No coral had grown there, perhaps because the recess caught less current than the surrounding surface. One diver filmed it closely, running a laser line across it for scale. The summit. The climb continued until the slope leveled out. Suddenly, the divers were no longer looking up at stone but across a flat plateau. It was wider than they had imagined, a platform of interlocked blocks stretching out in all directions until it fell away into the dark. The center was slightly raised, like the suggestion of a plinth or foundation. Whatever had once stood here was gone, but the placement of the stones hinted at design rather than accident. A pair of divers circled the summit, scanning for signs of entry points. If the pyramid had an interior chamber, logic suggested it might be accessible from here. But the stone was solid, unbroken, save for a few narrow cracks no wider than a hand. In one corner of the summit, near where the slope dropped away, they found something different, a cluster of smaller stones arranged in a loose arc. Unlike the rest of the pyramid, these were irregular in shape, almost as if they had been moved here later. What purpose they served, no one could guess, the edge of mystery. From the summit, the divers could see only darkness beyond their lights. The pyramid's other faces descended into nothingness, the slopes vanishing into the void. Somewhere out there, the seafloor stretched into miles of featureless sand. The isolation was complete. One diver shone his light outward and caught a fleeting glimmer, something metallic, half buried in sediment on a lower ledge. It could have been a piece of equipment from a past expedition or something far older, but there was no time to investigate on this dive. The priority was the summit and the markings. The slow return depth and time are unyielding masters. No matter how much they wanted to linger, the divers' bottom time was running out. They began their descent, moving along a different face to cover more ground. This slope was rougher, with more bare stone exposed. Here faint parallel grooves ran across multiple blocks, their spacing too even to be random. The grooves were heavily worn, softened by centuries of water, but they were there, repeating, deliberate. The team filmed them from multiple angles, knowing these images could become a focal point for the debate above. Near the base, the divers paused at another indentation, this one circular and much deeper than the rectangular recess above. Its rim was smooth, its interior dark. One diver extended a camera into the opening, but the beam of light disappeared into a narrow tunnel that seemed to lead inward. How far, and to what, was impossible to tell. Breaking the surface, when the team finally rose toward the light, they carried more than footage and measurements. They carried impressions of scale, of silence, of deliberate construction half hidden beneath the work of the sea. On deck, as they stripped out of their gear, the air felt strange, lighter, yet also thinner, as though part of them was still below. Their voices were quiet. The ocean had a way of stealing words. That night, the footage played on a loop in the control room. The summit, the indentations, the grooves, each frame was studied, paused, magnified. The circular opening at the base drew the most attention. Could it be an entrance? If so, what lay beyond? Plans began to form for a return dive, one dedicated entirely to exploring that single point. It would require smaller, more maneuverable ROVs, or perhaps specially trained cave divers. The risks would be high, but the possibility of an internal chamber was irresistible. Above all, the descent had confirmed one thing: the pyramid was not just a shape on sonar, not just an anomaly. It was a place, built or shaped, ancient or natural, but undeniably a presence in the deep. The footage from the most recent dive was not rushed into public release. Instead, it lived first in quiet rooms, projected onto wide screens in the ship's analysis bay and in dim-lit offices back on shore. There, frame by frame, the pyramid began to speak, not in words, but in lines, shapes, and repetitions. The summit plateau. The summit was the first feature to undergo close scrutiny. What, at depth, had seemed simply like a flat surface now revealed subtler details. The stones that made up this plateau were not uniform. They varied in size, but they were laid out in a pattern, larger blocks forming the perimeter, smaller ones filling the center. This arrangement, though not uncommon in human construction, is rare in nature. One geologist on the team noted how the outer blocks seemed to lock the inner ones in place, creating stability that could withstand shifting ground, or in this case, the unrelenting push of ocean currents. To her, this was evidence of engineering intent. To others, it was an uncanny accident of geology. But even the skeptics agreed. The summit was no random jumble. The rectangular recess, the rectangular indentation halfway up the slope, became the next focus. Its edges, when measured digitally, proved to be remarkably straight. Diver measurements and laser scans showed deviations of less than 2 centimeters over a span of 2 meters. In nature, straight lines do occur, but in combination with symmetry and right angles, they are far less common. Speculation bloomed. Was it the base for a statue or marker now lost, a socket for a wooden or metal element that has long since rotted away, or could it have been purely functional, a mooring point for something anchored to the pyramid? Marine biologists added another perspective. The lack of coral inside the recess suggested that the indentation might be relatively recent in geological terms, or perhaps, if ancient, it had been periodically cleared by current, by marine animals, or by human hands, far more recently than anyone imagined. The grooves. The grooves found on the pyramid's opposite face were the most tantalizing discovery. They ran parallel to one another, evenly spaced, crossing multiple blocks without breaking their alignment. This implied that the grooves were made after the blocks were placed, if indeed they were placed. Theories multiplied: tool marks from stone cutting or shaping, channels for drainage or to guide liquids during a ritual, guides for sliding heavy objects up or down the slope. When the grooves were compared to markings on other ancient structures, from the sled tracks of Egyptian pyramid sites to the incised channels at the Inca fortress of Sacsayhuaman, some similarities were found, though none were conclusive. The circular opening, and then there was the circular opening at the base, a perfect dark mouth in the stone, disappearing into a tunnel too narrow for the divers to enter. Laser scans taken from the lip suggested that the tunnel extended at least several meters inward before turning slightly downward. To engineers, the opening looked deliberate, smooth, symmetrical, its rim evenly beveled. To geologists, it could have been the result of erosion by a long-forgotten vent or fissure in the stone, later widened by marine life. The debate, like so much else about the pyramid, balanced between the deliberate and the coincidental, searching for alignment with the summit, recess, grooves, and opening mapped. The next question was whether these features aligned with anything each other, the cardinal directions, or celestial markers. Here, the analysis became almost meditative. The ship's computers overlaid the pyramid's 3D model onto a globe, adjusting for continental drift and changes in sea level over millennia. If the pyramid's corners had once pointed toward the cardinal directions, as some land-based pyramids do, then tectonic movement could have shifted that alignment by several degrees. Even accounting for such shifts, the pyramid's orientation was suggestive. Two of its corners were within 5 degrees of true north and south, a degree of precision unusual for a natural formation. Echoes across time, comparisons flowed freely. The summit arrangement echoed the platform tops of Mesoamerican pyramids, where temples once stood. The rectangular recess resembled base sockets found in both Egyptian and Polynesian monumental sites. The grooves called to mind quarrying channels in Mediterranean stonework. The circular opening mirrored certain spirit holes found in ancient Southeast Asian structures, portals for symbolic passage between worlds. Of course, these were analogies, not proofs. The human mind is adept at seeing patterns even where none exist, but the accumulation of parallels was difficult to ignore. The poetry of repetition. One historian aboard the vessel remarked that patterns in stone are like rhymes in a poem. On their own, they may be incidental. Together, they suggest intent. A single straight line is chance. Two at right angles might still be coincidence. But a flat summit, aligned corners, carved grooves, and symmetrical openings, all within one structure, in a place no such structure should be, began to feel less like nature's improvisation and more like the careful stanzas of a forgotten builder's work. What the patterns don't tell us. For all the detail gathered, the patterns gave no clear answer to the largest question: why? If the pyramid was a monument, to what or to whom was it dedicated? If it was a functional structure, what role could it have served in the middle of an ancient ocean, or on a landmass now gone? And if it was entirely natural, what unique combination of forces had conspired to create such harmony in stone? In the absence of answers, the patterns themselves became the story. They were the visible scars of time, each one a line in an epic whose language we no longer speak. Preparing for the next step, the circular opening remained the most urgent mystery. Plans began for a return, with smaller remotely operated vehicles, machines that could slip into the narrow tunnel and send back images. If the opening led to a chamber, it could change everything. The pyramid would no longer be a surface curiosity, but a structure with an interior, perhaps containing artifacts, perhaps only darkness. Whatever lay inside, the patterns in the stone suggested that the outside was only half the story. The invitation of the unknown. In the end, patterns are like questions. The more you find, the more you realize how much is missing. The pyramid had offered hints, grooves, alignments, openings, but no definitive signature. It remained poised between the worlds of nature and intention, its identity shifting like the light through the water above, and perhaps that is its greatest power. A structure that tells you everything becomes a monument, one that tells you almost nothing becomes a mystery. The ocean has no clock. It does not measure time in years or centuries, but in tides, in seasons of current, in the slow drifting of continents. For the pyramid, this means it has lived in a realm where history moves differently, a realm where preservation and destruction happen in the same breath. On land, monuments are exposed to the sun and wind, to frost and heat. Stones crack, metal rusts, inscriptions fade under a sky that never stops touching them. But beneath the sea, the rules change. There is no frost here, no wind to scour the surface. Instead, there is water, heavy, constant, and patient. The ocean can be merciful. It can wrap a thing in layers of silt, hiding it away from all that would erode it. Statues pulled from the deep often look as though they have been sleeping, their details preserved as if carved yesterday. The same might be true for the pyramid, its edges sharper than they have any right to be, its surfaces holding shapes that on land might have crumbled long ago. And yet, the ocean can be merciless too. Currents carry sand that grinds at the stone like a file. Salt water works its slow alchemy, breaking down minerals grain by grain. Creatures burrow into cracks, prying them wider over decades. Coral blooms where light can reach, burying the geometry under living growth. Here, preservation is never perfect. It is always accompanied by loss. The pyramid stands at the balance point between these forces. The same water that shields it from the sun also hides it from view. The same silt that preserves its details may also bury its secrets. The living coral that makes it beautiful may also conceal the marks that could tell us who built it. In this way, the ocean is both caretaker and thief. Perhaps this is why underwater ruins feel so different from those on land. They are not simply old, they are in conversation with time itself. Every ripple of the current is a page turning. Every grain of sand that settles on the stone is a letter written and erased in the same moment. Some scientists call the deep ocean a time machine, because what lies there is not simply in the past, but from the past, unchanged in ways the surface world cannot match. But unlike the machines of fiction, this one does not take us back. Instead, it brings pieces of the past forward, carrying them into our present, with just enough of their form intact for us to recognize and wonder. The pyramid is one of these pieces. It has traveled through millennia without moving. Its journey has been in time, not in space, and yet, like all time travelers, it bears the marks of the journey, edges softened here, deepened grooves there, stones shifted slightly under the weight of water. The possibility that some part of it, an inscription, a symbol, a fragment of its story, has already been erased beyond recovery. This is why the divers and scientists feel such urgency. Every year that passes is another year in which the ocean writes its own edits into the pyramid's history. The question is not whether it will change, but how much we can learn before it does. For now, the pyramid still stands, carrying its patterns and its silence, wrapped in the slow pulse of the deep. It is not just a structure, it is a clock we cannot read, marking a time we can only guess at, And somewhere in that silence, there may be more chambers, sealed by stone and silt, objects untouched for longer than human civilization has existed. Reaching them will not be easy, but the ocean's time machine has kept them safe this long. Perhaps it will allow us to see them before they vanish again. The circular opening at the base of the pyramid had haunted the team since the moment they first saw it. It was not large, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but its symmetry was undeniable. A perfect ring, its edges smoothed by time, its darkness deep enough that even a diver's strongest lamp could not touch the end. It was the kind of detail that could be nothing or everything. Planning the descent, this dive would be different from all the others. No broad surveys, no drifting up the pyramid's slopes. The goal was simple: get to the opening, send in a remotely operated vehicle, and see how far the tunnel went. Preparation began days in advance. The ROV was small, just over a meter long, with floodlights, a high-definition camera, and a tether linking it to the control station on the ship. Its frame was built for maneuverability, not speed in tight spaces. Slow was the only safe option. The crew double-checked every connection, every backup system. In the ocean, mechanical failure could mean losing more than equipment. It could mean losing the only chance to see what lay inside. Approach to the site. The sea was cooperative. That morning, a steady swell, light winds, good visibility down to the thermocline. Divers entered first, descending with the ROV cradled between them. Their lamps cut through the gloom until the pyramid emerged from the dark, rising like a wall of shadow and stone. The base loomed into view, and there it was, the opening unchanged since the last visit, framed by coral that seemed to guard it like the edges of an ancient coin. The divers hovered in place, holding position in the mild current, while the ROV operator's voice crackled in their earpieces from above. Into the tunnel, the ROV's lights flared on, flooding the entrance with cold white light. For the first few meters, the tunnel's walls were smooth, almost polished. The camera feed showed no coral growth inside. Perhaps the lack of light kept life from taking hold here. Meters passed slowly. The walls narrowed slightly, then widened again. A fine silt coated the floor, stirred into ghostly clouds by the ROV's movement. The divers stayed at the entrance, monitoring the tether to ensure it didn't snag. 10 meters in, the tunnel curved downward. The operator adjusted the pitch thrusters, guiding the ROV deeper. Here the walls changed. Smooth stone gave way to rougher surfaces, as if two types of rock met and joined. The first chamber, at 17 meters in, the tunnel opened into a space wider than the ROV's lights could fully illuminate. The camera panned slowly. The floor was uneven, scattered with large stone fragments. Some looked like fallen blocks, others were natural rock. Then something unexpected, a section of wall with a recess rectangular, like the one seen on the pyramid's outer slope. The recess was higher than the ROV could easily reach, but even from below it was clear that it was deliberate. Its edges were too precise to be accidental. The chamber's ceiling was low in places, forcing the ROV to maneuver carefully. The silt in the water swirled in slow motion, curling around the light beams like smoke. An unsettling discovery. Near the far side of the chamber, the ROV's camera picked up a line, faint, almost invisible, etched into the stone. At first it seemed random, but as the light shifted more lines appeared, intersecting. They formed shapes, arcs, parallel strokes, a triangle. The markings were too eroded to read as writing, but they were positioned deliberately, at about the height of a standing person's chest. The operator froze the frame, zooming in for the record. Whether these were symbols, tool marks, or something else entirely, no one on the team could say. Deeper still, a second tunnel led out of the chamber, narrower than the first. The ROV eased into it, lights piercing the black ahead. The walls here were rougher still, and the silt was thicker. A careless move could blind the cameras completely. 10 meters in, the passage ended abruptly, not in a wall of stone, but in a collapse. Blocks of varying size were piled against each other, some leaning into the passage as though frozen in mid-fall. If there had been a further chamber, it was sealed now. The operator let the camera linger, scanning for gaps, but there was none wide enough to pass through. The pyramid had given one glimpse of its interior, and then closed its hand. The ROV backed out slowly, its tether coiling gently in the diver's hands at the entrance. The upward curve of the tunnel seemed steeper on the return, and the silt from their earlier passage drifted lazily after them. When they emerged into open water again, the divers turned their lamps outward, scanning the pyramid's base before ascending. The stone seemed unchanged, patient, silent, indifferent to the intrusion. Back on deck, on the ship, the video feed played in the control room as the team gathered. The chamber was studied first, its dimensions mapped against the pyramid's exterior. The rectangular recess and the faint markings drew the most discussion. Were they related to the grooves and features on the outside, or did they suggest that the pyramid's builders, if it had builders, had continued their work within? The collapse at the end of the second tunnel was frustrating, but also tantalizing. It hinted at more beyond, rooms and spaces still sealed, perhaps since the day the pyramid sank, if it ever stood above the waves at all. What the currents keep. The ocean had allowed them inside, but only so far. It had revealed a room, a pattern, and a sealed passage, and then it had taken the rest for itself. The team knew they would have to decide whether to attempt clearing the collapse, a task that would carry enormous risk both to divers and to the integrity of the site. For now, they had proof of something extraordinary. The pyramid was not just a solid mass of stone, it had an interior, or at least part of one, and within that space were features too precise to dismiss as accident. The ROV footage had changed everything. For weeks, the pyramid had been an external mystery, a puzzle of shapes, slopes, and patterns visible only from the outside. Now, for the first time, the team had seen its interior, however small a part of it, and yet the answers were still tangled in the same paradox as before. Every discovery seemed to clarify the structure's reality, while also deepening its mystery. The evidence, on the table, on the whiteboard, in the ship's analysis room, the lead researcher drew 4 columns: exterior features, the flat summit, rectangular recesses, grooves, aligned corners; interior evidence, the chamber, the matching recess inside, the faint wall markings, the sealed tunnel; material analysis, basalt and sandstone blocks improbably sourced for this location; geographic context, isolated seafloor, no nearby landmass in known human history. Beneath each heading, the crew listed what they knew, what they suspected, and what they could only imagine. Theory 1. A natural formation. The skeptics' strongest case was geological. Basalt, they argued, could fracture into geometric forms through cooling and contraction. Sandstone layers could have been carried by ancient tectonic activity and fused into the formation. The grooves might be the result of water erosion, the recesses natural cavities, and yet this theory had to bend to fit the facts. The summit's perimeter stones, aligned to form a stable platform, were difficult to explain through random fracture. The repeated rectangular recesses, one outside, one inside, were unlikely products of chance. The circular entrance tunnel, smooth and symmetrical, resisted purely geological explanation. Natural forces could imitate human design. Yes, but how often did they imitate it? This precisely, in this combination, and in so improbable a location. Theory 2. A lost coastal civilization. This theory began with a simple premise. Sea levels were once lower. Could there have been an island or coastline here, long since drowned, home to a seafaring people capable of building in stone? If so, the pyramid might have been a ceremonial monument, a navigational marker, or even part of a larger complex now buried under sediment. The recesses could have held carvings or offerings. The grooves might have been functional for construction or symbolic in meaning. The problem was scale. Even accounting for Ice Age coastlines, this location was still far from any known settlement patterns. To accept this theory, we would have to accept that such a culture existed, skilled in engineering, yet invisible in the archaeological record outside this single structure. Theory 3. A remnant of a forgotten network. Some on the team, and more than a few onshore analysts, pointed to the global pattern of underwater anomalies. Yunaguni, Bimini, Kempat. Could the pyramid be part of a network of sites built by an interconnected maritime culture? In this view, the pyramid's isolation was not an accident, but a feature. It might have been a ceremonial meeting point for voyages across vast distances, a kind of oceanic cathedral whose builders traveled routes we no longer remember. The strongest argument for this theory was not direct evidence but parallels, similar alignments, similar construction choices, similar placement away from major landmasses. Its weakness was the same as its strength. Parallels are compelling, but they are not proof. Theory 4. The myth-made stone. This theory belonged more to the storytellers than to the scientists, but it had its hold nonetheless. Atlantis, Lemuria, Kumari Kandam. If even one of these legends had a fragment of truth, the pyramid could be the surviving monument of a civilization erased not just from history, but from memory. The chamber's wall markings, faint arcs and lines, became in this theory the ghost of a language. The sealed tunnel became a burial vault, or a sanctuary. The pyramid itself became a message sent forward through time, a voice from a world that ended in water. To the scientists, this was the weakest theory in evidence, yet the strongest in imagination. It offered a sense of why, even if it could not answer how. Balancing on the edge, the truth as always seemed to lie between extremes. Perhaps the pyramid was a natural core, shaped and then adapted by human hands. Perhaps the builders were not a lost empire, but a small advanced community whose works simply did not survive elsewhere. The markings inside might be a script, or they might be the unintentional byproduct of working stone in confined spaces. The recesses could have held ceremonial objects, or they could be tool marks left from construction. The grooves could have guided materials, or water. Each clue could be read in two ways, and in the reading, each person revealed their own leanings toward caution, toward wonder, or toward something between. The weight of uncertainty. What made the pyramid so compelling was not just what it was, but what it refused to be. It would not collapse neatly into an answer. It resisted the tidy box of natural formation just as it resisted the full embrace of man-made monument. It lived in the liminal space between. And in that space, it drew people in. Scientists who would normally dismiss fringe claims found themselves asking, what if? Skeptics who prided themselves on logic felt the quiet tug of mystery. Even those who leaned toward the mythic knew the evidence was not yet enough, but they also knew it was more than nothing. The pull toward the sealed tunnel. If there was one consensus, it was this: the sealed tunnel inside the pyramid might hold the key. If it led to more chambers, artifacts, or inscriptions, the question of human involvement could be settled. But reaching it would require removing the blockage, a task fraught with danger. The collapse could be unstable. Clearing it could damage the structure or endanger divers. For now it remained untouched, the ultimate temptation. It was as though the pyramid were holding back its final word, waiting to see if we deserved to hear it. The last theory. For now, in the end, the lead researcher wrote a final note on the whiteboard. We do not yet know if the pyramid was born of the earth or of human hands, but we know it is a place that remembers, and places that remember are worth returning to. The last theory was not a conclusion, but an acknowledgement. The pyramid was neither fully explained nor entirely unknowable. It was a bridge between geology and architecture, between history and legend, between the world we know and the one we have forgotten. The sea has a way of swallowing our footsteps. On land, the traces we leave, roads, walls, monuments, can endure for millennia. But out here, the ocean reclaims its space quietly, slowly, until only those who look closely can see where we have been. The pyramid is one of those traces. It rises from the seafloor, like the memory of something greater, something we were never meant to find. We have touched its stones, mapped its faces, glimpsed its interior, and still, it holds back. The last day at the site, on their final morning above the pyramid, the crew gathered on deck, long before the sun rose. The air was cool, the sky pale, with the first suggestion of dawn. Below them, the structure waited, as it had waited for centuries, indifferent to the attention of the few humans who had stumbled upon it. There was no more diving today, no more scanning runs. The equipment was secured, the ROV packed away. The work was done. For now, what remained was simply to be here, one last time, in the presence of something the world did not yet know. The ship drifted slowly, the water calm. It was easy to imagine that if you leaned over the rail and looked down far enough, you might catch sight of it, the dark silhouette of the pyramid resting in the blue. But the ocean revealed nothing. It never does, unless it chooses to. The horizon as a mirror. In the light of dawn, the horizon seemed infinite. Sea and sky blurred at the edges, the faint line between them dissolving in the haze. It mirrored the very nature of the mystery they were leaving behind. No clear border between what we know and what we only think we know. For some, the pyramid was already becoming a memory, another expedition, another anomaly, another unanswered question. For others, it was a beginning, the opening page of a story that could take years, even decades, to tell. The ocean, in its quiet way, seemed unconcerned with either view. Why we searched, the team knew they might never solve the mystery completely. Perhaps no one would. But there is a quiet truth at the heart of such work. Answers are not always the point. Sometimes, we search because the act of searching deepens us, sharpens our sense of wonder, stretches the edges of what we believe possible. The pyramid had done that. It had taken something abstract, the idea of a hidden world, and given it shape, weight, and presence. They had come here chasing a sonar blip. They were leaving with something far more powerful, the knowledge that even in an age of satellites and maps, there are still places the world has not claimed. The keeper of its own story, the pyramid will keep its own story. For now, it will sit in the darkness, its stones wrapped in coral and currents, its sealed tunnel hiding whatever lies beyond. It will listen to the slow hum of the deep, to the songs of whales passing in the distance, to the faint vibrations of storms above, and perhaps centuries from now, another vessel will anchor here, another group of people will descend into the black water, their lights sweeping across the same stones, their hearts quickening at the sight, and they too will leave without the full truth. Because the ocean's oldest lesson is that some things are not meant to be claimed, only encountered, sailing away. By mid-morning, the ship's engines rumbled to life. The pyramid slipped behind them, unseen but never entirely gone. The coordinates were logged, the data archived, the footage stored in multiple copies, but the real record, the one that would last, was in the minds of those who had been there. The horizon widened with every mile, the sea stretching ahead in endless shades of blue. The pyramid lay far below, already returned to its solitude, patient as ever. The last image, that night, long after the ship had left the site, one of the divers stood alone on deck. The stars above mirrored the lights they had carried into the depths. Somewhere beneath those same stars, the pyramid rested in perfect darkness. He thought of the grooves, the recesses, the chamber, the sealed tunnel. He thought of the way the stone had felt under his gloved hand, solid, ancient, unmoving. And he knew that, whatever the truth was, it would outlast them all. He turned toward the horizon. The line between sea and sky had vanished entirely in the dark. Only the quiet breathing of the ocean remained. Closing reflection. We are a species of builders, but also of seekers. We build monuments to outlast us, and when we find such monuments, whether carved by human hands or shaped by nature, we feel the same pull, the desire to understand. The pyramid in the middle of the ocean is a reminder that the world still holds places where the map stops and imagination begins. It asks us to accept that mystery can be a destination in itself, not just a doorway to answers. Perhaps in the end, that is its gift, not certainty, not proof, just the quiet knowledge that the horizon is not an ending but an invitation. And so the pyramid remains, unseen, untouched, and waiting beneath the slow, endless breathing of the sea.